annoying that my stream didn't save from yesterday, my Russian author series. So, my apologies to my Storm crew, especially for those of you that would have liked to see that episode. Perhaps I can give you all a recap, maybe just like a summary. Yeah, I think that sounds good. In part 4, chapter 1, let's see if I can remember. We're introduced to a new character, and hold on a second, I need to open my book. I can't even remember his name. He's basically trying to get with Raskolnikov's sister, Avdotya Romanovna. Much like Razmahin, much like Luzhin. And he is basically trying to cast doubt, much like Raskolnikov, on the relationship that she will have with Luzhin. He doesn't think it's gonna work out. Okay, let's see. Okay, Crime and Punishment. Sverdlov, I believe. Yeah, Svidgurlov. Svidgurlov or Sverdlov. I think I'm just gonna call him Sverdlov because his name is definitely hard to say. In War and Peace, we will find ourselves today in chapter 6, part 3. And let's see. Princess Mary is basically saying that she's not going to get married. A lot of the chapter 5, was focused around the potential for Princess Mary to get married to Anatole, Prince Vasily's son. And at the end of the chapter, she's just like, no, you know what, I'm not going to get married. Alright, so let's continue in War and Peace. I encourage you to chat and discuss, much like any other just chatting stream on Twitch. I think, as I've said before, I am using these Russian author series books to provide me with more content during these just chatting streams, because I think, as I've also said, my stream is small. Like, it's probably, if not the smallest stream on Twitch. And as a result of that, I don't really have a lot of chatters in my chat. And that means that it can be difficult for me to have those interactive just chatting streams where I'm just like chatting it up with people in my chat. So instead, I basically have these like books that I can read to you all, and you can listen to the book, or you can ask questions like, who's that character, why is this important, or, you know, what's happening. We're already, I think, over halfway through Crime and Punishment, so I'll be looking for, I think, new content ideas and new stream ideas. I could try new books, or I could also try a new gameplay series. As I've said, I don't think I'll be playing Hearthstone Mercenaries on stream anymore, but if you are a fan of that series, please do let me know. And I can always consider new series or continuing series based on popular support of those series and channels. Stormer Show is successful, as I've said, because of its viewing audience. So thank you for all the views. Thank you for the chat. For those of you that have chatted, thank you for the donations. Denominator, like, you rock. Thank you for that $5. And yeah, just thank you for everything. Follows included, subscriptions included. Shares are huge too. Okay, chapter 6. Yeah, if my audience ever gets big enough, I might consider just having like just chatting streams, or I might consider some cooking streams, but the only reason I haven't had that in the past is because a lot of the time when I'm cooking, I'm waiting for the food to cook. So in between those different cycles, like I'm gonna need to like maybe that would be a good time for me to catch up with chat and kind of like punctuate it, like chat with my chat, and then showcase food prep or something like that. Like for today, I had a burger and it was pretty simple to make, but it could be something that's entertaining to watch. If I have any dishes that require special preparation, I may consider streaming that for entertainment. Just food for thought, I guess. Alright, anyway, chapter 6. It was long since the Rostovs had news of Nicholas. Not till midwinter was the Count at last handed a letter addressing in his son's handwriting. I believe Prince Nicholas is, he's a Russian prince. I think he's one of the ones that's serving on the Western Front against France. On receiving it, he ran to tiptoe to his study in alarm and haste, trying to escape notice, closed the door, and began to read the letter. Anna Mikhailovna, who always knew everything that passed in the house, on hearing of the arrival of the letter, went softly into the room and found the Count with it in his hand, sobbing and laughing at the same time. It can't be Count Bezukov, because Count Bezukov's already died. It might be Count Rostov. Anna Mikhailovna, though her circumstances had improved, was still living with the Rostovs. "My dear friend," said she in a tone of pathetic inquiry, prepared to sympathize in any way. The Count sobbed yet more. "Nikolenka, a letter, was wounded. My darling boy, the Countess, promoted to be an officer. Thank God, how tell the little Countess?" Anna Mikhailovna sat down beside him with her own handkerchief, wiped the tears from his eyes and from the letter. Then, having dried her own eyes, she comforted the Count, and decided that at dinner until tea time she would prepare the Countess, and after tea, with God's help, would inform her. At dinner, Anna Mikhailovna talked the whole time about the war news and about Nikolenka, twice asked when the last letter had been received from him, though she knew that already, and remarked that they might be very likely be getting a letter from him that day. Each time that these hints began to make the Countess anxious, and she glanced uneasily at the Count and at Anna Mikhailovna. The latter very adroitly turned the conversation to insignificant matters. Natasha, who of the whole family was the most gifted with a capacity to feel any shades of intonation, look, and expression, pricked up her ears from the beginning of the meal, and was certain that there was some secret between her father and Anna Mikhailovna, that it had something to do with her brother, and that Anna Mikhailovna was preparing them for it. Bold as she was, Natasha, who knew how sensitive her mother was to anything relating to Nikolenka, did not venture to ask any questions at dinner, but she was too excited to eat anything, and kept wriggling about on her chair regardless of her governess's remarks. After dinner, she rushed headlong after Anna Mikhailovna, and dashing at her, flung herself on her neck as soon as she overtook her in the sitting room. What? Yeah, sometimes, like, I'm not sure what they mean. Like, what do you mean flung on neck? Like, your neck is not somewhere you can land comfortably. Like, if you land on your neck, you're probably going to be paralyzed. My neck absorbed the blow. But, yeah, apparently Anna Mikhailovna did. Apparently. Yeah. something else that I wanted to say too. Oh, we've got a pretty good schedule planned for today. Phoenix Wright definitely will have the investigation today. We should have an exercise stream later. Yeah, maybe just those three, actually. I did get Fallout 76, and it might be a good idea for me to try to complete SpongeBob SquarePants on stream. If any of you have a preference for different series, let me know. Like, if you're more of a Fallout fan, let me know. If you're more of a SpongeBob fan, let me know. And I could try to kind of do what other content creators do and highlight types of content that people are interested in watching and seeing. Okay, but anyway, Auntie Darling, do tell me what it is. Nothing, my dear. No, dearest, sweet one, honey, I won't give up. I know you know something. Anna Mikhailovna shook her head. You're a little sly boots, she said. A letter from Nikolenka, I'm sure of it, exclaimed Natasha, reading confirmation in Anna Mikhailovna's face. I think I kind of just prefer Crime and Punishment to War and Peace because in War and Peace it's a little bit difficult to keep track of what is going on because of the raw amount of characters that are in the story. It's like there's Anna Mikhailovna, there's Tikhon, there's Natasha. Even just in this chapter, there's like 4 or 5 different characters: Nikolenka, Anna Mikhailovna, Natasha, the Rostovs. Like there's just a bunch of characters, and it's like hard to keep track of it all. Like, okay, who's who now? like what's happening? And I think families were bigger back then. Like, it wasn't uncommon, I think, for there to be like 7 or 8 siblings. I think part of the reason for that is because youth mortality was so high. Like, you just had a bunch of kids because you're like, hey, you know what? Some of them might not live to see 5. So we're just going to have a bunch of kids to improve our chances. But for God's sake, be careful. You know how it may affect your mama. I will. Only tell me. You won't. Then I'll go and tell at once. Anna Mikhailovna, in a few words, told her contents of the letter, on condition that she should tell no one. No, on my true word of honor, said Natasha, crossing herself. I won't tell anyone, and she ran off at once to Sonia. Nikolenka, wounded. A letter, she announced in gleeful triumph. Nicholas, was all Sonia said, instantly turning white. Natasha, seeing the impression of the news of her brother's wound produced on Sonia, felt for the first time the sorrowful side of the news. I think it was also pretty rare back then to survive battlefield injuries. Like in the Civil War days, like if you got a wound, there was a good chance that it would get infected and then you would die. They didn't really have a lot of like ways of disinfecting and preventing the spread of gangrene and stuff like that. She rushed to Sonia, hugged her, and began to cry. A little wound, but he has been made an officer. He's well now, he wrote himself, she said she through her tears. There now. It's true that all you women are crybabies, remarked Petya, pacing the room with large, resolute strides. Now I'm very glad indeed that my brother has distinguished himself so. You're all blubberers and understand nothing. Natasha smiled through her tears. You haven't read the letter? Asked Sonia. No, but she said that it was all over and that he's now an officer. See, so many characters. Petya, Sonia, Nikolenka, Natasha. It's like... Thank God, said Sonia, crossing herself, but perhaps she deceived you. Let us go to Mama. Petya paced the room in silence for a time. If I'd been in Nikolenka's place, I would have killed even more of those Frenchmen, he said. What nasty brutes they are. I'd have killed so many that there'd have been a heap of them. Hold your tongue, Petya. What a goose you are. I'm not a goose, but they are who cry about trifles, said Petya. Do you remember him? Natasha suddenly asked after a moment's silence. Sonia smiled. Do I remember Nicholas? No, Sonia, but do you remember so that you... no, Sonia, but do you remember so that you remember him perfectly? Remember everything? Said Natasha with an expressive gesture, evidently wishing to give her words a very definite meaning. I remember Nikolenka too. I remember him well, she said, but I don't remember Boris. I don't remember him a bit. What, you don't remember Boris? Asked Sonia in surprise. It's not that I don't remember. I know what he's like, but not as I remember Nikolenka. Him. I just shut my eyes and remember, but Boris, no. She shuts her eyes. No, there's nothing at all. Oh, Natasha. And Sonia looked ecstatically and earnestly at her friend as if she did not consider her worthy to hear what she meant to say, and as if she were saying it to someone else, with whom joking was out of the question. I'm in love with your brother once and for all, and whatever may happen to him or to me, shall never cease to love him as long as I live. Natasha looked at Sonia with wondering and inquisitive eyes, and said nothing. She felt that Sonia was speaking the truth, that there was such love as Sonia was speaking of, but Natasha had not yet felt anything like it. She believed it could be, but did not understand it. Shall you write to him? She asked. Sonia became thoughtful. The question of how to write to Nicholas, and whether she ought to write, tormented her. Now that he was already an officer and a wounded hero, would it be right to remind him of herself, and, as it might seem, of the obligations to her he had taken on himself? I don't know. I think if he writes, I will write too, she said, blushing. And you won't feel ashamed to write to him? Sonia smiled. No. I should be ashamed to write to Boris. I'm not going to. Why should you be ashamed? Well, I don't know. It's awkward and would make me ashamed. And I know why should be ashamed, said Petya, offended by Natasha's previous remark. It's because she was in love with a fat one in spectacles. That's how Petya described his namesake, the new Count Bezikov. Now she's in love with that singer. He meant Natasha's Italian singing master. That's why she's ashamed. Is she referring to Pierre? I thought Pierre was getting married to Helene. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I don't know. Petya, you're stupid, said Natasha. Not more stupid than you, madam, said the 9-year-old Petya with the air of an old brigadier. The Countess had been prepared by Anna Mikhailovna's hints at dinner. On retiring to her own room, she sat in an armchair, her eyes fixed on a miniature portrait of her son on the lid of a snuff box, while the tears kept coming into her eyes. Anna Mikhailovna, with the letter, came on tiptoe to the Countess's door and paused. Don't come in, she said to the old Count who was following her. Come later. And she went in, closing the door behind her. The Count put his ear to the keyhole and listened. At first he heard the sound of indifferent voices, then Anna Mikhailovna's voice alone in a long speech, then a cry, then silence, then both voices together with glad intonations, and then footsteps. Anna Mikhailovna opened the door. Her face wore the proud expression of a surgeon who had just performed a difficult operation, amidst the public to appreciate his skill. It is done, she said to the Count, pointing triumphantly to the Countess, who sat holding in one hand the snuff box with its portrait, and in the other the letter, pressing them alternately to her lips. When she saw the Count, she stretched out her arms to him, embraced his bald head, over which she again looked at the letter and the portrait, and in order to press them again to her lips, she slightly pushed away the bald head. Vera, Natasha, Sonia, and Petya now entered the room, and the reading of the letter began. After a brief description of the campaign and the 2 battles in which he had taken part, and his promotion, Nicholas said that if he kissed his father's and mother's hands, asking for their blessing, and that he kissed Vera, Natasha, and Petya. Okay. Besides that, he sent greetings to Monsieur Schelling, Madame Schoss, and his old nurse. Ask them to kiss for him dear Sonia, whom he loved and thought of just as the same as ever. When she heard this, Sonia blushed so that tears came into her eyes, and unable to bear the looks turned upon her, ran away into the dancing hall, whirled round it at full speed with her dress puffed out like a balloon, and flushed and smiling, plumped down on the floor. The Countess was crying. "Why are you crying, Mamma?" asked Vera. "From all he says one should not be glad and not cry." This was quite true, but the Count, the Countess, and Natasha looked at her reproachfully. "And who is it she takes after?" thought the Countess. Nicholas's letter was read over hundreds of times, and those who were considered worthy to hear it had come to the Countess, for she did not let it out of her hands. The tutors came, and the nurses, and Dmitri, and several acquaintances, and the Countess reread the letter each time with fresh pleasure, and each time discovered in it fresh proofs of Nikolenka's virtues. How strange, how extraordinary, how joyful it seemed that her son, the scarcely perceptible motion of whose tiny limbs she had felt 20 years ago within her, that son about whom she used to have quarrels with the too indulgent Count, that son who had first learned to say Père and then Granny, that this son should now be away in a foreign land amid strange surroundings, a manly warrior doing some kind of man's work of his own, without help or guidance. The universal experience of ages, showing that children do grow imperceptibly from the cradle to manhood, did not exist for the Countess. Her son's growth toward manhood at each of its stages had seemed as extraordinary to her as if there had never existed the millions of human beings who grew up in the same way. A mother's love. She will always see the best side of her son. As 20 years before, it seemed impossible that the little creature who lived somewhere under her heart would ever cry, suck her breast, and begin to speak. So now she could not believe that the little creature could be this strong, brave man, this small son and officer that, judging by this letter, he now was. I think it's based in ego. It's like, hey everyone, look at what I made. I'm awesome. My son and or daughter is awesome. It's proof. It's proof that I'm awesome. It's like, okay. Okay, dude. Or ma'am. What a style. How charmingly he describes, said she, reading the descriptive part of the letter. And what a soul. Not a word about himself. Not a word. About some Denisov or other, though he himself, I dare say, is braver than any of them. He says nothing about his sufferings. What a heart. How like him it is. And how he's remembered everybody, not forgetting anyone. I always said when he was only so high, I always said. As you might recall, I think Prince Nicholas is pretty well liked. I think he is present on the battlefield, and he's pretty well liked. He takes credit for a lot of the victories of the army. But I think he's it's well earned on some level. Like, I think it is well earned on his part, even if he does exaggerate sometimes. For more than a week, preparations were being made. Rough drafts of letters to Nicholas from all the household were written and copied out, while under the supervision of the Countess and the solicitude of the Count, money and all things necessary for the uniform and equipment of the newly commissioned officer were collected. Anna Mikhailovna, practical woman that she was, had even managed by favor with army authorities to secure advantageous means of communication for herself and her son. She had opportunities of sending her letters to the Grand Duke Konstantin Pavlovich, who commanded the guards. The Rostovs supposed that the Russian guards abroad was quite a definite address, and that if a letter reached the Grand Duke and commanded the guards, there's no reason why it should not reach the Pavlograd regiment, which was presumably somewhere in the same neighborhood. So it was decided to send the letters and money by the Grand Duke's courier to Boris, and Boris was to forward them to Nicholas. The letters were from the old Count, the Countess, Petya, Vera, Natasha, Sonia, and finally there were 6,000 rubles for his outfit and various other things the old Count sent to his son. So they're sending stuff back to Nicholas on the front line. Next time there'll be chapter 7. I'm wondering if Prince Nicholas will survive. Alright, quick BRB. I gotta use the bathroom, and then we'll begin with Chapter 2 in Crime and Punishment. Thanks for watching. We're back. By we, I mean me. Chapter 2. It was nearly 8 o'clock. The two young men hurried to Bacalaios to arrive before Lucian. Why, who was that? Asked Rasmussen as soon as they were in the street. It was Fergalov, that landowner in whose house my sister was insulted when she was their governess. Through his persecuting her with his attentions, she was turned out by his wife, Marfa Petrovna. This Marfa Petrovna begged Dunia's forgiveness afterwards, and she's just died suddenly. It was of her we were talking this morning. I don't know why I'm afraid of that man. He came here at once after his wife's funeral. He's very strange and is determined on doing something. We must guard Dunia from him. That's what I wanted to tell you, do you hear? Guard her? What can we do to harm Avdotya Romanovna? Thank you, Rodya, for speaking to me like that. We will guard her. Where does he live? I don't know. Why didn't you ask? What a pity. I'll find out, though. Yeah, he didn't have any problems finding out where Raskolnikov lived. Did you see him? Asked Raskolnikov after a pause. Yes, I noticed him. I noticed him well. You did really see him. You saw him clearly, Raskolnikov insisted. Yes, I remember him perfectly. I should know him in 1,000. I have a good memory for faces. They were silent again. That's all right, muttered Raskolnikov. Do you know, I fancied, I kept thinking that it may have been a hallucination. What do you mean? I don't understand you. Well, you all say, Raskolnikov went on, twisting his mouth into a smile, that I'm mad. I thought just now that perhaps I really am mad and have only seen a phantom. What do you mean? Why, who can tell? Perhaps I am really mad. Perhaps everything that's happened all these days may be only imagination. Rodya, you have been upset again. But what did he say? What did he come for? Raskolnikov did not answer. Razumhin thought a minute. Now let me tell you my story, he began. I came to you. You were asleep. Then we had dinner, and then I went to Porfiry's. Zametov was still with him. I tried to begin, but it was no use. I couldn't speak in the right way. They don't seem to understand and can't understand, but are not a bit ashamed. I drew Porfiry to the window, began talking to him, but it was still no use. He looked away and I looked away. At last I shook my fist in his face and told him as a cousin I'd brain him. He merely looked at me. I cursed and came away. That was all. It was very stupid. To Zametov I didn't say a word. But you see, I thought I'd made a mess of it, but as I went downstairs a brilliant idea struck me. Why should we trouble? Of course, if you were in any danger or anything, but why need you care? You needn't care a hang for them. We shall have a laugh at them afterwards, and if I were in your place, I'd mystify them more than ever. How ashamed they'll be afterwards. Hang them. We can thrash them afterwards, but let's laugh at them now. To be sure, answered Raskolnikov, but what will you say tomorrow? He thought to himself. Strange to say, till that moment it had never occurred to him to wonder what Rasmussen would think when he knew. As he thought, Raskolnikov looked at him. Rasmussen's account of his visit to Porfiry had very little interest for him. So much had come and gone since then. In the corridor they came upon Luzhin. He had arrived punctually at 8, and was looking for the numbers, so that all three went in together without greeting or looking at one another. The young man walked in first, while Peter Petrovitch, for good manners, lingered a little in the passage, taking off his coat. Pulcheria Alexandrovna came forward at once to greet him in the doorway. Dunya was welcoming her brother. Peter Petrovitch walked in and quite amiably, though with redoubled dignity, bowed to the ladies. He looked, however, as though he were a little put out and could not yet recover himself. Pulcheria Alexandrovna, who seemed also a little embarrassed, hastened to make them all sit down at the round table where a samovar was boiling. As we might recall, looking at samovar right now, samovar is a highly decorated tea urn used in Russia. Let me see if I could look up a picture for you all. Well, whoever's watching. It looks like that. As we might recall, Luzhin and Raskolnikov did not have a good first meeting. Much like Sverdlov, Raskolnikov's like, "What are you doing? Get out of here. I didn't invite you." Dunya and Luzhin were facing one another on opposite sides of the table. Dunya, I think at this point in the story, is still betrothed to Luzhin. I think they're engaged. And there's 3 different guys who want to marry her. Rasmussen, Sverdlov, and now Luzhin, aka Peter Petrovitch. Rasmussen and Raskolnikov were facing Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Rasmussen was next to Luzhin, and Raskolnikov was beside his sister. A moment's silence followed. Peter Petrovitch might just leave too, because he said in his letter that he did not want to see Raskolnikov, and if he saw him, he was gonna call it all off. Peter Petrovitch deliberately drew out a cambric handkerchief, reeking of scent, and blew his nose with an air of a benevolent man who felt himself slighted, was firmly resolved to insist on an explanation. In the passage, the idea had occurred to him to keep on his overcoat and walk away, and so give the 2 ladies a sharp and emphatic lesson and make them feel the gravity of the position. But he could not bring himself to do this. Besides, he could not endure uncertainty, and he wanted an explanation. If his request had been so openly disobeyed, there was something behind it, and in that case it was better to find it out beforehand. It rested with him to punish them, and there would always be time for that. "I trust you had a favorable journey," he inquired officially of Pulcheria Alexandrovna. "Oh, very, Peter Petrovitch." "I am gratified to hear it, and Avdotya Romanovna is not over-fatigued either. I am young and strong. I don't get tired, but it was a great strain for Mother," answered Dunya. "That's unavoidable. Our national railways are of terrible length. Mother Russia, as they say, is a vast country. In spite of all my desire to do so, I was unable to meet you yesterday. But I trust all passed off without inconvenience." "Oh no, Peter Petrovitch, it was all terribly disheartening," Pulcheria Alexandrovna hastened to declare with peculiar intonation. "And if Dmitri Prokofitch had not been sent us, I really believe by God himself we should have been utterly lost. Here he is, Dmitri Prokofitch Rasmussen," she added, introducing him to Luzhin. "I had the pleasure yesterday," muttered Peter Petrovitch with a hostile glance sidelong at Rasmussen. Then he scowled and was silent. Yeah, I think Rasmussen was there when Luzhin was introducing himself. He did not receive a warm reception. Peter Petrovitch belonged to that class of persons on the surface very polite in society, who make a great point of punctuality. Let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. Punctiliousness, meaning great attention to detail or behavior. Punctiliousness. Is it punctil or punctil? I think it's punctiliousness. But who directly they are crossed in anything are completely disconcerted and become more like sacks of flour than elegant and lively men of society. Again, that is something that Raskolnikov is like an expert at. Again, all was silent. Raskolnikov was obstinately mute. Avdotya Romanovna was unwilling to open the conversation too soon. Razumhin had nothing to say, so Pulcheria Alexandrovna was anxious again. Marfa Petrovna is dead, have you heard? She began, having recourse to her leading item of conversation. I will be very surprised if Sverdlov comes out of nowhere and he's like, yo, yo, yo. We shall battle to the death for Junia's hand. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen, but it would be interesting if it did. Marfa Petrovna is dead, have you heard? She began having recourse to her leading item of conversation. To be sure, I heard so. I was immediately informed that, and I have come to make you acquainted with the fact that Arkady Ivanovich Sverdlov set off in haste for Petersburg immediately after his wife's funeral. So at least I have excellent authority for believing. Yeah, Sverdlov did not waste any time. Like, his wife died and he's like, who's available? I'm not trying to be single. To Petersburg here? Dunya asked in alarm and looked at her mother. Yes, indeed, and doubtless not without some design, having in view the rapidity of his departure and all circumstances preceding it. Good heavens, won't he leave Dunya in peace even here? Cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna. I imagine that neither you nor Avdotya Romanovna have any grounds for uneasiness, unless, of course, you are yourselves desirous of getting into communication with him. For my part, I am on my guard, and am now discovering where he's lodging. Oh, Peter Petrovitch, you would not believe what a fright you've given me, Pulcheria Alexandrovna went on. I've only seen him twice, but I thought him terrible. I am convinced that he was the cause of Marfa Petrovna's death. It's impossible to be certain about that. I have precise information. I do not dispute that he may have contributed to accelerate the course of events by the moral influence, so to say, of the affront, but as to the general conduct and moral characteristics of that personage, I am in agreement with you. I do not know whether he is well off now and precisely what Marfa Petrovna left him. This will be known to me within a very short period. But no doubt, here in Petersburg, if he has any pecuniary resources, he will relapse at once into his old ways. Pecuniary means relating to money. He is the most depraved and abjectly vicious specimen of that class of men. I have considerable reason to believe that Marfa Petrovna, who was so unfortunate as to fall in love with him and to pay his debts 8 years ago, was of service to him also in another way. Solely by her exertions and sacrifices, a criminal charge involving an element of fantastic and homicidal brutality, for which he might well have been sentenced to Siberia, was hushed up. That's the sort of man he is, if you care to know. Yeah, they do not get along, Sverdlov and Luzhin. Good heavens, cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Raskolnikov listened attentively. Are you speaking the truth when you say that you have good evidence of this? Dunya asked sternly and emphatically. I only repeat what I was told in secret by Marfa Petrovna. I must observe that from the legal point of view, the case was far from clear. There was, and I believe still is, living here a woman called Reslich, a foreigner who lent small sums of money at interest, and did other commissions, and with this woman Sverdlov had a long while close and mysterious relations. She had a relation, a niece I believe, living with her, a deaf and dumb girl of 15, or perhaps not more than 14. Reslich hated this girl, grudged her every crust. She used to beat her mercilessly. One day the girl was found hanging in the garret. At the inquest, the verdict was suicide. After the usual proceedings, the matter ended, but later on, information was given that the child had been cruelly outraged by Sverdlov. It's true, this was not clearly established. The information was given by another German woman of loose character whose word could not be trusted. No statement was actually made to the police. Thanks to Marfa Petrovna's money and exertions, it did not get beyond gossip. And yet the story is a very significant one. You heard, no doubt, of Dotya Romanovna when you were with them the story of the servant Philip, who died of ill treatment he received 6 years ago, before the abolition of serfdom. I heard, on the contrary, that this Philip hanged himself. Everyone he interacts with mysteriously dies. Quite so, but what drove him, or rather perhaps disposed him to suicide, was the systematic persecution and severity of Mr. Sverdlov. I don't know that, answered Dunya dryly. I only heard a queer story that Philip was a sort of hypochondriac, a sort of domestic philosopher. The servants used to say he read himself silly, and that he hanged himself partly on account of Mr. Sverdlov's mockery of him and not his blows. When I was there, he behaved well to the servants, and they were actually fond of him, though they certainly did blame him for Philip's death. I perceive, Avdotya Romanovna, that you seem disposed to undertake his defense all of a sudden, Luzhin observed, twisting his lips into an ambiguous smile. There's no doubt that he's an astute man, and insinuating where ladies are concerned, of which Marfa Petrovna, who has died so strangely, is a terrible instance. My only desire has been to be of service to you and your mother with my advice, in view of the renewed efforts which may certainly be anticipated from him. For my part, it is my firm conviction that he will end in a debtor's prison again. Marfa Petrovna had not the slightest intention of settling anything substantial on him, having regard for his children's interests. And if she left him anything, it would only be the mere sufficiency, something insignificant and ephemeral which would not last a year for a man of his habits. Peter Petrovitch, I beg you, said Dunya, say no more of Mr. Sverdlov. It makes me miserable. They're definitely trying to attack each other's character. I think Sverdlov explained in the previous chapter that he was going to do what he can to prevent Peter Petrovitch from marrying Dunya. Raskolnikov doesn't want his sister to marry either one of them. He's like, no, I want you all to go away. He has just been to see me, said Raskolnikov, breaking his silence for the first time. He's like, I just had the pleasure of meeting the guy. There were exclamations from all, and they all turned to him. Even Peter Petrovitch was roused. An hour and a half ago he came in when I was asleep, waked me and introduced himself, Raskolnikov continued. He is fairly cheerful and at ease, and quite hopes that we shall become friends. He is particularly anxious, by the way, Dunya, for an interview with you, at which he asked me to assist. He has a proposition to make to you, and he told me about it. He told me, too, that a week before her death, Marfa Petrovna left you 3,000 rubles in her will, Dunya, and that you can receive the money very shortly. Thank God, cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna, crossing herself. Pray for her soul, Dunya. It's a fact, broke from Luzhin. Tell us, what more? Dunya urged Raskolnikov. Then he said that he wasn't rich. All the estate was left to his children, who were now with an aunt. Then that he was staying somewhere not far from me, but where I don't know, I didn't ask. But what? What does he want to propose to Dunya? Cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna in a fright. Like she's afraid he's going to propose. He's the old landlord, I think. Did he tell you? Yes, what was it? I'll tell you afterwards. Raskolnikov ceased speaking and turned his attention to his tea. Peter Petrovitch looked at his watch. I'm compelled to keep a business engagement, and so I shall not be in your way, he added with an air of some pique, and he began getting up. Don't go, Peter Petrovitch, said Dunya. You intended to spend the evening. Besides, you wrote yourself that you wanted to have an explanation with Mother. Precisely so, Avdotya Romanovna, Peter Petrovitch answered impressively, sitting down again, but still holding his hat. I certainly desired an explanation with you and your honored mother upon a very important point indeed. But as your brother cannot speak openly in my presence of some proposals of Mr. Sverdlov, I too do not desire and am not able to speak openly, in the presence of others, of certain matters of the greatest gravity. Moreover, my most weighty and urgent request has been disregarded. He's salty because Raskolnikov is there. He's like, oh great, this jerkwad is here. I very specifically asked you not to have him here. Assuming agree, yeah, he's saying that in so many words. He's saying that. Assuming an aggrieved air, Lucian relapsed into dignified silence. Your request that my brother should not be present at our meetings was disregarded solely at my instance, said Dunya. You wrote that you had been insulted by my brother. I think that this must be explained at once, and you must be reconciled. And if Roger really has insulted you, then he should and will apologize. Peter Petrovich took a stronger line. There are insults, Evdotia Romanovna, which no goodwill can make us forget. There is a line in everything which it is dangerous to overstep, and when it has been overstepped, there is no return. That wasn't what I was speaking of exactly, Peter Petrovich, Dunya interrupted with some impatience. Please understand that our whole future depends now on whether all this is explained and set right as soon as possible. I tell you frankly at the start that I cannot look at it in any other light, and if you have the least regard for me, all this business must be ended today, however hard that may be. I repeat that if my brother is to blame, he will ask your forgiveness. Yeah, she has not seen her brother in 3 years, and sometimes it shows. Like, you really think Raskolnikov is going to apologize? Really? You think so? I'm surprised that you're putting the question like that, said Lucian, getting more and more irritated. Esteeming and so to say adoring you, I may at the same time very well indeed be able to dislike some member of your family. Yeah, he and Raskolnikov definitely don't get along. Though I lay claim to the happiness of your hand, I cannot accept duties incompatible with... don't be so ready to take offense, Peter Petrovich. Dunya interrupted with feeling. Be the sensible and generous man I've always considered, and wish to consider you to be. I've given you a great promise. I am your betrothed. Trust me in this matter, and believe me, I shall be capable of judging impartially. My assuming the part of judge is as much a surprise for my brother as for you. When I insisted on his coming to our interview today after your letter, I told him nothing of what I meant to do. Understand that if you're not reconciled, I must choose between you. It must be either you or he. That is how the question rests on your side and on his. Yeah, it's like, yeah, Raskolnikov has said that too. He's like, look, either it's going to be you, it's going to be me or him. And now she's saying it too. It's like, it's going to be you or him. I don't want to be mistaken in my choice, and I must not be. For your sake, I must break off with my brother. For my brother's sake, I must break off with you. I can find out for certain now whether he is a brother to me, and I want to know it. And of you, whether I am dear to you, whether you esteem me, whether you are the husband for me. You're asking him to hug a porcupine. Evdotia Romanovna, Lucian declared huffily. Your words are of too much consequence to me. I will say more, they are offensive in view of the position I have the honor to occupy in relation to you. To say nothing of your strange and offensive setting me on a level with an impertinent boy, you admit the possibility of breaking your promise to me. You say you or he, showing thereby of how little consequence I am in your eyes. I cannot let this pass, considering the relationship and the obligations existing between us. What? Cried Dunya, flushing. I set your interest beside all that has hitherto been most precious in my life, what has made up the whole of my life, and here you are offended at my making too little account of you. Raskolnikov smiled sarcastically. Razumhin fidgeted, but Peter Petrovich did not accept the reproof. On the contrary, at every word he became more persistent and irritable, as though he relished it. Love for the future partner of your life, for your husband, ought to outweigh your love for your brother, he pronounced sententiously. I might be saying this wrong. Sententiously. Yeah, sententiously, in a pompous or affected manner. In my case, I cannot be put on the same level. Although I said so emphatically that I would not speak openly in your brother's presence, nevertheless, I intend now to ask your honored mother for a necessary explanation on a point of great importance closely affecting my dignity. Your son, he turned to Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Yesterday, in the presence of Mr. Razudkin, or I think that's it. Excuse me, I've forgotten your surname. He bowed politely to Razman, insulted me by misrepresenting the idea I expressed to you in a private conversation. Drinking coffee, that is. That marriage with a poor girl who has had experience of trouble is more advantageous from the conjugal point of view than with one who has lived in luxury, since it is more profitable for the moral character. Your son intentionally exaggerated the significance of my words and made them ridiculous, accusing me of malicious intentions, and as far as I could see, relied upon your correspondence with him. I shall consider myself happy, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, if it's possible for you to convince me of an opposite conclusion, and thereby considerately reassure me. Kindly let me know in what terms precisely you repeated my words in your letter to Rodion Romanovich. Like he's doing a good deed or something by marrying a poor person. I don't remember, faltered Pulcheria Alexandrovna. I repeated them as I understood them. I don't know how Rodya repeated them to you. Perhaps he exaggerated. He could not have exaggerated them, except at your instigation. Peter Petrovich, Pulcheria Alexandrovna declared with dignity, the proof that Dunya and I did not take your words in a very bad sense is the fact that we're here. Like, we showed up. Good mother, said Dunya approvingly. Good mother, said Dunya approvingly. Then this is my fault again, said Luzhin aggrieved. Well, Peter Petrovich, you keep blaming Rodion, but you yourself have just written what was false about him, Pulcheria Alexandrovna added, gaining courage. I don't remember writing anything false. You wrote, Raskolnikov said sharply, not turning to Luzhin, that I gave money yesterday not to the widow of the man who was killed, as was the fact, but to his daughter, whom I had never seen till yesterday. You wrote this to make dissension between me and my family, and for that object added coarse expressions about the conduct of a girl whom you don't know. All that is mean slander. Excuse me, sir, said Luzhin, quivering with fury. I enlarged upon your qualities and conduct in my letter solely in response to your sister's and mother's inquiries, how I found you and what impression you made on me. As for what you've alluded to in my letter, be so good as to point out one word falsehood, show, that is, that you didn't throw away your money, and that there are not worthless persons in that family, however unfortunate. He's already done that. To my thinking, you, with all your virtues, are not with the little finger of that unfortunate girl at whom you throw stones. Would you go so far, then, as to let her associate with your mother and sister? I've done so already, if you care to know. I made her sit down today with Mother and Dunya. Rodya, cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Dunya crimsoned. Razumhin knitted his brows. Luzhin smiled with lofty sarcasm. You may see for yourself, Avdotya Romanovna, he said, whether it's possible for us to agree. I hope now that this question is at an end, once and for all. I will withdraw, that I may not hinder the pleasures of family intimacy, and the discussion of secrets. He got up from his chair and took his hat. But in withdrawing, I venture to request that for the future I may be spared similar meetings, and so to say, compromises. I appeal particularly to you, Honored Pulcheria Alexandrovna, on this subject, the more as my letter was addressed to you and to no one else. Pulcheria Alexandrovna was a little offended. You seem to think that we're completely under your authority, Peter Petrovich. Dunya has told you the reason your desire was disregarded. She had the best intentions, and indeed you write as though you were laying commands on me. Are we to consider every desire of yours as a command? Let me tell you, on the contrary, that you ought to show particular delicacy and consideration for us now, because we have thrown up everything, and have come here relying on you. So we are, in any case, in a sense, in your hands. That's not quite true, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, especially at the present moment, when the news has come of Marfa Petrovna's legacy, which seems indeed very apropos, judging from the new tone you take to me, he added sarcastically. Apropos is with reference to or concerning. Judging from that remark, we may certainly presume that you were reckoning on our helplessness, Dunya observed irritably. But now in any case, I cannot reckon on it, and I particularly desire not to hinder your discussion of the secret proposals of Arkady Ivanovich Sverdlov, which he has entrusted to your brother, and which have, I perceive, a great and possibly a very agreeable interest for you. Yeah, Raskolnikov is not a fan of either one, but he doesn't know that. Good heavens, cried Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Razumhin could not sit still in his chair. Aren't you ashamed now, sister? Asked Raskolnikov. I'm ashamed, Rodya, said Dunya. Peter Petrovich, go away, she turned to him, white with anger. Peter Petrovich had apparently not at all expected such a conclusion. He had too much confidence in himself, in his power, and in the helplessness of his victims. He could not believe it even now. He turned pale, and his lips quivered. Avdotya Romanovna, if I go out of this door now, after such a dismissal, then you may reckon on it. I will never come back. Consider what you're doing. My word is not to be shaken. What insolence, cried Dunya, springing up from her seat. I don't want you to come back again. No more, no more. Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more. What you say? Is that a Ray? Yeah, that's a Ray Charles song, I'm pretty sure. What? So that's how it stands, cried Luzhin, utterly unable to the last moment to believe in the rupture and so completely thrown out of his reckoning now. So that's how it stands. But do you know, Avdotya Romanovna, that I might protest? What right have you to speak to her like that? Pulcheria Alexandrovna intervened hotly. And what can you protest about? What rights have you? Am I to give my Dunya to a man like you? Go away, leave us altogether. We are to blame for having agreed to a wrong action, and I above all. But you have bound me, Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Luzhin stormed in a frenzy. By your promise, and now you deny it. And besides, I have been let on account of that into expenses. This last complaint was so characteristic of Peter Petrovich that Raskolnikov, pale with anger and with the effort of restraining it, could not help breaking into laughter, while Pulcheria Alexandrovna was furious. Expenses? What expenses? Are you speaking of our trunk? But the conductor brought it for nothing for you. Mercy on us, we have bound you. What are you thinking about, Peter Petrovich? It was you who bound us, hand and foot, not we. Enough, mother, no more, please, Avdotya Romanovna implored. Peter Petrovich, do be kind and go. I'm going, but one last word, he said, quite unable to control himself. Your mamma seems to have entirely forgotten that I made up my mind to take you, so to speak, after the gossip of the town had spread all over the district in regard to your reputation. Disregarding public opinion for your sake and reinstating your reputation, I certainly might very well reckon on a fitting return, and might indeed look for gratitude on your part. And my eyes have only now been opened. I see myself that I may have acted very, very recklessly in disregarding the universal verdict. Does the fellow want his head smashed? Cried Razumhin, jumping up. You are mean and spiteful man, cried Dunya. Not a word, not a movement, cried Raskolnikov, holding Razumhin back, and going close up to Luzhin. Kindly leave the room, he said quietly and distinctly, and not a word more, or... Peter Petrovich gazed at him for some seconds with a pale face that worked with anger. Then he turned, went out, and rarely has any man carried away in his heart such vindictive hatred as he felt against Raskolnikov. Him and him alone he blamed for everything. It is noteworthy that, as he went downstairs, he still imagined that his case was perhaps not utterly lost, and that so far as the ladies were concerned, all might very well indeed be set right again. Whew. So, Luzhin, perhaps as predicted, has seen Raskolnikov and broken up his relationship with Dunya Avdotya Romanovna. Is Razumhin going to be the rebound? Or is it going to be Sverdlov? We'll have to wait and see. Next time we'll be diving into Chapter 3, Forgotten Regiment. Thank you for watching. I'll be back today's Phoenix and exercise stream, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.